And Gabe, I'll turn over the meeting to you, Mr. Chair.
Cool. All right. Welcome everyone to the Grant County Economic Diversification Advisory Council. It's 305, October 20th, 2021. I think all those present here on Zoom are myself, Chair Gabriel Wojtek. We have Emily Campbell, Leanna Etchberger, looks like staff Ben Elter and August Granith are in the chambers there, along with Lacey Shumway and John Gunther. Are there any conflicts of interest, disclosures, or ex parte communication that anyone would like to disclose at this time?
I'd only like to mention that there's been conversation about with the business technical assistant position that there might be partnership with our Moab Small Business Resource Center.
Duly noted. Thank you, Liana. And are there any citizens to be heard in the chambers or virtually? I don't really see any unknown folks on the Zoom. Anyone showing up in the chambers to be heard?
Don't see any.
No. Great. Okay. We have a presentation scheduled at the top of the meeting here. So I'll introduce Amity Rembold, Rural Development Specialist with RCAC. It looks like they are on the Zoom. And take it away, Amity.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here. My name is Amity Rembold, and I am a Regional Development Specialist with Rural Community Assistance Corporation, which we shortened to RCAC because it's a lot less of a mouthful. So I am actually located in Bozeman, Montana. That's where my field office is. So RCAC was established in 1978 and was focused mainly on housing at that time. But over the last 40 plus years, the organization has grown to serve a 13-state region that stretches from Montana down to New Mexico and then over to Alaska and Hawaii, even the Marshall Islands and Guam. So what we do is we are a community development financial institution, or CDFI, and we provide training and technical assistance and financial resources for the organizations and the governmental agencies that we work with to help them achieve their rural community development goals. So that's kind of a very brief history of the organization. We have staff located throughout the 13-state region that we serve, but our headquarters are actually in Sacramento, California. So we have a variety of different programs that include technical assistance, training, and financing for water and water infrastructure projects and operation, for affordable housing, for community and economic development, community facility development, and then we are, as a CDFI, we do operate a revolving loan fund that also provides funding for each of those types of projects. I actually work within the Building Rural Economies program, which is part of the community and economic development services that we provide. We currently work with roughly, I believe it's about 23 local governmental agencies and nonprofits throughout our 13-state region. And what we do specifically is work to increase the capacity of those agencies and organizations to identify and implement community economic development projects and to work with entrepreneurs to help them start and expand businesses. Our goal is to, as an organization, is to help create viable and sustainable rural communities. And I think the various programs that we offer really feed into a holistic approach to that, because as we all know, housing infrastructure and jobs are things that all communities need in order to be able to thrive and be viable and sustainable. And so I think that the organization provides a unique holistic approach to that, because we can come in and work with agencies and organizations on various aspects of that to ensure that the infrastructure is available to have businesses and homes develop, those kinds of things. So within the Building Rural Economies program, as I mentioned, we're focused on community economic development and entrepreneurship. And we have a variety of tools and resources that we use to build the capacity of the organizations that we work with. They include different workshop series focused on identifying and implementing economic development projects, and then workshops also focused on entrepreneurship and working with individual entrepreneurs to help them start or expand businesses. The vast majority of our funding is grant funding. And so we actually began interacting with Grand County about a month ago. We received some grant funding and we're looking to bring on 3 new entities to work with under that grant funding. And we put out a request for applications, and the county submitted a very strong application. And it was one of the top 2 applications that we looked at. And while we really wanted to work with the county to meet the goals that they identified in that application, we did ultimately choose another organization to work with. However, that being said, we do have another source of grant funding that would allow us to begin working with the county as well to reach the entrepreneurial and economic diversification goals. So just wanted to maybe spend a little bit of time talking about what that might look like and answer any questions you might have about that. So what we would look to do with that funding is to form a partnership with the county where we could help the Economic Development Department, as well as the advisory boards as yourself and the community as a whole, to begin to identify those economic development and entrepreneurship priorities for the community and specific projects that are part of those priorities, with the goal that when the next round of funding is available, and we're looking for additional communities to bring in under that funding, that Grand County would have the infrastructure in place for us to be able to take the next step with them under that funding.
Yeah, thanks so much, Amity. So I guess for the application, so Ben and I submitted this application a little while ago, and it was kind of a last minute thing. We did our best effort on it and tried to, sounded like an opportunity for additional resources to address kind of these diversification goals we've been talking a lot about with this council. And anyway, we talked about a handful of possible ways to continue the relationship going forward. We figured it would be a good opportunity to just share this group and the potential resources they can share with us as a community if a relationship is formed. And wanted to share that with everybody here. So if anybody have any questions for Amity, I'm not going to ask her to stay for the entire meeting, but now's the time for some Q&A if there's any thoughts or questions.
Amity, do you partner only with the public government, their local government, or do you work as well with local partners who are looking at these issues maybe at a more tactical level, such as our affordable housing groups and other groups like the university that are focusing on these issues today, but could maybe use a little bit more expertise or tactical assistance? Like, what does that partnership look like?
Absolutely. Thank you for allowing me to answer that question for you, Emily. We work with a variety of different types of organizations. Within the program that I work with, Building Rural Economies, we primarily focus on working with government agencies and nonprofits. However, we do have the other departments within the organization, including housing, that works with housing counseling agencies, housing development, tribal THDE, Tribal Housing Department entities, those kinds of different organizations. Our infrastructure, our wastewater and water and wastewater infrastructure programs often work with tribal utilities, work with small utilities, those kinds of things. So we do have a variety of different types of entities that we work with under the organization. RCAC has actually been working on housing in the Moab area and Grand County area with, I believe it's, I might get the name wrong here, but the Housing Authority of Southeastern Utah. So they are working on a tax credit. Our housing department is working on a tax credit project for affordable multifamily units in Moab. And then our housing department also has worked with USDA to bring in community rebuilders, I think is the name of the agency. And they are building straw bale houses as part of a self-help housing program under USDA, and is actually one of the first organizations nationally to be building that type of green housing. So we do work with a variety of different entities, and although the Building Rural Economies program has not been working in Moab or Grand County yet, we're looking forward to that opportunity, and we do have other departments within the agency that are working there.
Thanks for answering my question. I appreciate the clarity.
Anybody else with any questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm really excited and encouraged by the possibilities here and the collaboration and assistance from an established entity such as RCAC, and I think it seems like it could add a lot of value to our community here in our efforts to build our economy in a strong way. So thanks. Are there any other questions or comments? If not, then thank you so much.
Say one more thing, which
Yeah.
is that we're going to talk a little bit about this, and Leanna mentioned it, but I think it would be a partnership would go tightly with whatever the future of a business technical assistance position in the county would look like. This would be kind of an addition of programming that would kind of filter in, combine with custom fit and SBA related programming, entrepreneurial ecosystem building, and technical assistance support. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's how I would imagine Amity. That's it for me.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again, Amity, for coming and speaking with us, and we'll be in touch, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Thank you all for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate it.
All right.
Great.
Thanks,
Bye.
All right, so we'll move on to our discussion and action items for the meeting today. First off, the first item is approval of minutes from the September 1st meeting. And did anyone get a chance to review those? And if so, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I move we approve the minutes from the September 1st meeting of the Grand County Economic Diversification Advisory Council.
Motion by Emily. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Liana. Is there any discussion or edits suggested before I call for a vote? All right, seeing none, I will call for that vote. All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Vote passes unanimously. Let's see. I guess we should probably just get a little call just because, just to make sure we have everyone here. Voting in favor would be Gabriel Wojtek, Emily Campbell, Leanna Etchberger. And what other voting members do we have present today? Can y'all help me out a little bit here?
We have Lacey.
Lacey, I'm sorry, Lacey.
And I actually,
And
do I vote? I can't remember.
I don't think so.
Too many people.
But no offense if you do, but so all right.
I will carry even if I don't. So I'm just gonna assume that I'm not a voting member here.
Vote passes unanimously. So I'll hand it over to staff to talk about that September 1st meeting that we just voted for minutes.
Awesome. So, yeah, so thank you everybody for participating in that very structured and productive meeting in September, and for their patience as we rescheduled this to 2 weeks later. As everybody knows, I've taken on some additional responsibilities recently, and kind of that maelstrom meant that I should push this back a little bit. But I wanted to circle back to the two main priorities that were discussed during that meeting: the Economic Development Master Plan and the Local Business Expansion Grant Program. Provide a bit of an update, and then kind of talk through some details and just give people's thoughts as we're kind of going forward, designing these things, identifying deliverables, and kind of charting timelines. So I guess one brief thing is that the first kind of pass on the budget happened this past Friday. I worked with Chris to put a budget together, a draft budget that went through the Budget Commission hearing last Friday, and we got funding. Well, I put in funding, I should say, for the Economic Development Master Plan. I put $65,000 in for that, and there's some flexibility in both these numbers. But for the Local Business Expansion Grant, ended up with about $500,000, and that could change depending on how salaries and other line items shake out. But they're in the budget; they are prioritized. So anyway, kind of going piece by piece, starting with the Economic Development Master Plan, I wanted to touch base on. We have John here, who's doing a ton of all the planning work. That's not this particular piece, and you know, kind of wanted to get an understanding of, from your perspective, John, how this would fit into the general plan process, and kind of what your thinking would be on that, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're redoing the 2012, Ben probably knows, you should know this too. We're redoing the 2012 economic development section,
Okay.
updating all the data. And then we're going to have a number of goals and policies and objectives, somewhat similar, probably a little bit more out there, around economic development initiatives. Diversification is a big one, tourism is a big one. It's just looking at, you know, what's there. Regional economic development initiatives is usually a big one too. Business retention and expansion is a big one. So all of those be listed as goals and policies with objectives, and then having indicators attached to those.
Sure.
One of the gaps, and there'll be a lot of them, will be an economic development master plan, because it's not done.
There you go.
Just like a land use plan is not done either, and we need one. And the transportation plan needs to be updated because we don't really have one. And both of those are underway. So in the plan, because it's top down, we'll be identifying that as a gap collectively. I don't mean just us, collectively.
Sure.
And then talking about when it could be delivered in an action table.
Can I ask a clarifying question? As a non-planner, what is it that is in the Economic Development Master Plan, or in that something that would be in that means that it's not a part of the general plan?
Okay, so-
And what's in that gap?
Because a general plan is considered to be, this is the standard answer in planning, is comprehensive.
Okay.
That is, all these elements speak to each other. Normally, when you do a master plan, it's in a silo, a fairly well-defined silo. Land use tends to stretch in a bunch of areas, so does transportation, and economic development can too. So what you try to do is have these pieces work together. That's what a comprehensive plan, general plan is about. Once you get a master plan done, then you update the general plan.
Okay.
And then integrate it into the other elements that are there. So, and if you get a perfect general plan, and I've never seen one, but they do exist somewhere in ether. Once you get a perfect one, all the comprehensive elements actually work together with a great strategy, with a forward action plan that's going forward, with a number of priorities, resources, and constant reporting, and all of that's provided. So just to summarize, our goal is to get the standard language in a general plan section, like an element like economic development, it's a big one, is background, data, current status, and then goals and objectives.
Okay.
That's the standard framework for every element.
Sure.
And then the implementation part, which is a separate section, takes that and tries to put those together so they work together. So for example, it's hard to do economic development when you don't have good serviced industrial land
Sure.
or good serviced commercial land, because you can't do it very well scope, or you don't have a good regional strategy. Neither of those we have.
Right.
And those are gaps, big gaps.
Sure.
So you can't connect economic development to serviced industrial until you do a land use plan properly, that is. And you can still do that if you've got some land out there. So for example, take Cisco. Cisco right now in the long range land use is land use designation, you know what it is?
Is it still the same way it is for the incinerator once upon a time?
It's an industrial.
Yeah.
It's industrial and land use. But in the land use code, it's got an OAO campground overlay. Well, that's a big disconnect.
Sure.
Disconnect between industrial and a campground. And those exist throughout the county. And, you know, for example, Thompson Springs, big gap between range and grazing and what it probably could be as a little hamlet. Although that's not a big deal for Grand County, we get a lot of inquiries about it. So those are the kinds of anomalies you try to address. And there's a big legislative process. Obviously, the commission, both commissions, the planning commission and the county commission need to be involved in both of those because they're very legislative.
Cool.
So one of the things I was saying to August earlier that would be really good, when we started doing this top-down approach before, we had 2 forums that ran with this. Once we got the top-down approach adopted by planning commission, that's an if, of course, we would then move ahead with implementation within the corporate structure and with the community. The next big step is to do public engagement, go out to the community, start working with them on a grassroots exercise to re-inform the plan. And the other 2 big elements are housing, a housing forum in the spring, and an economic development forum, whatever you want to call that, August in the spring.
Sure. Right, and we could bake that into the existing Canyonlands Business Summit, or we could create some programming in order to take advantage of the fact that people are already coming for something they see value in, and then get good feedback.
And you want good partners there, stakeholders there, the regional components there,
Sure.
and then probably the state, I would say.
Yep. No, we probably have
You might want to invite RCAC, RCAC,
Sure.
but any partners like that, because it's very collaborative and it's meant to deliver kind of a scoping exercise, which could fit in right into your master plan.
Okay.
Does that all make sense? Or
I think that makes sense. Does anybody, obviously, for me, that's a lot of planning jargon, and I'm trying my best to keep up. Does anybody have any clarifying follow-up questions on kind of
Emily usually does.
what John, what John is discussing here? No. Cool.
Emily's shaking her head.
I'm learning as we go.
Say it again.
I'm learning as we go.
Great. On budget, 65K. Thoughts too much, too little? John, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, I think we're doing our land use one. It should be more than that, but hey, August, because
Right.
we're 60 and you're 65. I think that's reasonable.
Okay.
So,
So that's basically conjuring numbers out of thin air. So, you know, if that feels like it, and Chris basically said, you know, you can spend as much as you want on this stuff. It's the consultants will just charge you and give you more. But
he didn't say that to me. He said that to you.
well, he didn't say that I could put as much money
Oh,
into it. He was saying in the process, you budget less, you get less. You budget more, you get more.
oh yeah. Okay. I gotcha.
That's what he was saying.
Because I
There's not like a pricing quote that is, this is what
Okay.
you get.
Because I listed in our discussion just before you, economic development, even though I said it's going to be August doing it.
Right, you had it
And
in
then I
there.
mentioned the capital improvement plan, which Chris is doing, which is a big one in the general plan
Right.
too. We've got 5 projects there
Right.
in the general plan that we think, this is just staff thinks. So the economic development one, capital improvement one, regional planning one. There's a resource management one, which is a state requirement, which is just
Right.
updating that part. And what am I missing? Parks and recreation and culture.
Okay.
So none of those we have.
Sure. Cool.
We got a lot of plans, but we don't have those. And
You got plans for plans.
yeah, so it's good to have those. And you can't do them all at one time. That's the other thing.
Sure.
So which one should you do first? To me, ECDEV is the first one,
Right.
and land use is the first, and transportation. So we've got 3 of them running right now.
Well, and my thought is that we get this budget passed, we'll start in the new year, do the RFP early enough so that we can actually hit the ground running in the new year. And I would imagine it'll take 6 to 12 months. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Um,
Usually, yeah, 10 to 12 probably.
And let me see what else I have on here. I think the other question that from my view is the way that our department is being structured as having both kind of a destination stewardship angle on the tourism side as well as kind of a non-tourism economic development side is for an economic development master plan. I'm thinking it probably needs to include both, I mean, all aspects of the economy. So what is the, you know, how is the county going to plan moving forward with the tourism side of the economy and then everything else? And then for me, that makes a lot of sense because that informs our entire department and not just siloing the diversification side of things. And that's my thought. So I just wanted to hear some feedback on that one way or the other. Emily, you're looking like very pensive.
I have a question, but what specifically are you looking for feedback on? Just generally resourcing, or I missed the statement?
That specific question is whether or not it feels right for this economic development master plan, which was recommended by this body, for that to be holistic in nature and include all sectors of the economy that we currently have and are planning to kind of develop. Because the original conversation around this was very diversification oriented. But I just wanted to, I guess a scoping question.
Yeah.
So this feeds into a question I had. So let me give you my thought on that, and then I'll pause on my question. My opinion is yes. I mean, at this point, diversification is going to depend on so many other parameters, our ability to execute on different areas, the actual density and strengths of different sectors, and our sort of economies of scale. And so while diversification will be more nuanced and allow us to focus going forward, having a strong foundational understanding of the economy is probably going to be one of the strongest tools we have in our arsenal to actually create a stronger and more diversified economy. My thoughts.
Here.
I'll quickly ask my question because it relates to that. John, in your sort of planning packet related to the general plan work, you have that fabulous matrix of all of the different plans that we do want to invest in at various times. Some are more dependent on others than others are. It might be helpful to maybe just take a second and look at that and even just send it asynchronously from a sequencing perspective, because I would love to know what this opens up. So we've talked transportation, we've talked general land use studies and so on. And as we do look at this, it's also intertwined. So I'd love to get your staff's opinion on how this affects sequencing and the relative scope of some of those things that this might open up for our next steps, knowing that this will be a long process. We can maybe set some of those flagstones. So I apologize, that's partially economic diversification and partially planning, but I think in this case, the two are pretty linked together.
Yeah. So you actually studied the matrix, Emily, so you know exactly what's there? Or?
I'm not sure I could cite it for you verbatim, but I've spent a lot of time looking at it. So
well, that's good for you, because I was just talking about that today, whether we're getting enough feedback. Anyway, that'll be one of the things by the way, on November 10th is a public engagement thing, which is coming up here. Lacey, I'm not sure you've been invited to that too. Did you know that? November 10th is
an open, about that?
An open house. Yeah, it's an open house where we're actually bringing a number of tables together. NECDEV is a big one there. Anyway, when you look at the matrix, it's got all the elements across the top you'd normally see in a very functional general plan. The top part are all studies and master plans. The bottom part are decision makers. We're mapping the decision-making process in a number of areas right now, and NECDEV will be an important one for that mapping too. So obviously we need to work together as partnerships. That takes time to do all of that because we have a lot of committees and referral groups. Right. I probably don't even know all of them, to tell you the truth, because there always seems to be a new one. Anyway, that we're hoping to get that decision-making and public engagement strategy, at least the core of that part of the general plan. And this is coming back to Emily's question. So part of the goal with an action plan in the general plan, which is the two bookends are done. I've drafted. I've got an executive summary done, and I've got the implementation one done. And now it's working on all the elements. And within each element will be gaps. And we described it today like a puzzle. you have a puzzle, you look at the county, but you have all these pieces missing. And it still looks like a county, but it's missing sections that actually make things work together. So on economic development, you would probably be focusing in certain areas where big business incubation could be located, could develop. There's entrepreneurial centers. There's fiber, which is going in right now, where all of that needs to be mapped and shown, and then compiled from a land use perspective, transportation perspective, infrastructure. So infrastructure covers all of those elements. Sewer, we're just talking about this today too. So municipal services usually are sewer, water, and stormwater. But in this case, groundwater and sewer looks after that. So there's a different strategy that's connected. The other things that we don't look after exactly are power, gas, and fiber, or broadband. And I might be missing something in there. Is there any utility I'm missing? So those ones are actually, they should be in the general plan because they're part of economic development.
Sure.
And they're part of land use.
Definitely.
Now, Emory Telecom is ramping up with all of their stuff. We should get a commission report to them, by the way, on all of this. But anyway, they're going to have a table on the 10th as well. They've given us all of their data files, the mapping files, as you know.
Yep.
And that just came across the other day. So that's really helpful to actually start to frame, back to your question, I'm taking a while to get there. It's to frame in terms of how these things are integrated and how the priorities should work. So to me, land use, transportation, infrastructure, and economic development and housing are the first 5 or 6 that all relate to each other and are very good to integrate and then develop good mapping and strategies out of those, if that's making any sense. Maybe I'm just talking.
Did that answer your question, Emily, or did that create clarity or confusion?
It does, and it was less a question and more of a, like, you know, it'd be good to have some visibility into that going forward if we're moving forward with this economic development master plan, so that this body can see what it unlocks, so that, you know, the planning staff and the county commission can start to get a better sense of what this sequences into, because there's a lot that we want to know. There's a lot of blind spots that we have as a community, and having a plan, this is my operative brain, helps us understand, you know, how we sequence some of this effort, where we put money aside, and so on. So yes, it was helpful, and I think it's something we should continue to revisit.
Awesome.
If I could throw one more thought in there, and that's sustainability. That one you don't want to forget, because that is really the integrating cohesive force that pulls everything together.
Right.
And to think of that collaboratively, you need partnerships to make those things happen. And we know that we've got a lot of initiatives happening. So that's another gap. We don't really have a sustainability plan
For the county.
Yeah.
On that, I know the city is doing it, you know,
They are.
it's a
And we're working with
priority.
Mila on,
Is there any way we can piggyback on that exercise?
we could, except she's doing it more like a lower level study, I would say. I wouldn't call that a master plan so
Okay.
far. It's more like an action plan, which is
Okay.
okay.
Sure.
Because inductively, you can develop a master plan out of that. But it's more tinkering to me. It's more tinkering than it is master plan.
Sure. Sure.
But that's just my call.
Fair enough. Okay, that's good to know. I think the other thing to mention is that I think it's like something that's really important within this, and John and I were talking about this before the meeting, but you know, having a commonly available, publicly available kind of data dashboard for the community that is just has all these information that a lot of people have questions about and ask our office about all the time, and we kind of have to do ad hoc responses. And we have a lot of data, we subscribe to a lot of data, we need it for our own operations. And so making that public, but also using that as an opportunity as we're doing all of this planning, we're putting together commonly agreed upon metrics and standards for achievement, having that be publicly available too. And so there's a couple platforms that do this very well, but I think kind of on this, what I'm thinking is starting with the first one, which is if we have data, get it uploaded and online as soon as possible. And then this, there's a vendor called Townfolio that does this well, but I think we probably have to do an RFP. I don't know.
So if I could just quickly say something.
Yeah,
I
shoot.
presented nationally on community indicators for the American Planning
Well,
Association.
you had a great
Yeah,
project in
so-
the past. So.
Yeah, and so there's 3 or 4 elements. First of all, you want trends data. You don't want to just have 1 year, or a
Right.
snapshot. You want to have something over a number of years, and we have that. You want to have, usually you want to have focus groups, and this is a good economic venture we can put in the master plan, in all those sectors. So transportation, you'd want to have focus groups talking about what the data is and how it should be displayed, because you can't show everything.
Right.
And you might as well show the stuff that's the most valuable. The other thing is it runs 24/7. That's a beautiful thing to have, because people can come in and look at Grand County, see an introduction, and they can look at anything they want: demographics, high school graduation rates, college, university graduation rates, what else? Life expectancy, all of those, whatever you can disaggregate. Some of it you can't get consensus, of course. And then getting that data ongoing. So who maintains it and who looks after is a big thing, because you can't do it. No one in this room is going to do that off their side of their desk.
No.
So unless you get somebody to work with you, and this is a good commission presentation on this, you're not, it's not going to work right. It might work for a little while. The data part's such a big part of economic development. And if you don't have that working right, it's limping along.
Yeah.
The other thing is you can run an annual report really easily.
Right.
You can
already
tap
have
into
it.
grants really easily. Anybody can, because the data is right there. So it really opens up a vista of opportunities for grants and for reporting on an annual basis.
Was that Vista reference intentional there?
Oh, yeah, no.
Cool. No, I totally agree. So, I mean, that was my note. You asked me this before, but I think that was one. I can't remember if that ended up explicitly as a line item in the budget. So I have to go reevaluate.
And we
to
can
make
work
sure
together on that. You got more money than we do, so.
that-
I don't know what Gabe feels about that as a commission member, but it's one of those things in our strategic plan, within the draft strategic plan, which we already got some
Right.
feedback on, regarding how we report on the strategies that are already in the strategic plan. So that's
Totally.
always connected. So
Okay.
And if I can just throw in there, it would even really be good. We get asked at the chamber a lot, well, how many jobs are open right now?
Yeah.
Or how many, jobs do you want to fill? And if we could include like a business aspect in there, it's hard. I mean, we can give them workforce service. That's not always a real, but if there was a way for businesses to report to somebody, or I
Right.
don't know.
Well, so,
But-
so part of this, I think there's a hand, there's the web maintenance side,
Mhm.
basically having a portal and an interface that is live and operational and downloadable and just functions as a UI, as a user interface. And then there's the actual data stewardship and maintenance. And part of how I've been thinking through this is having, we already work on the tourism side with the communications agency that has a great data kind of component, and they do a lot of data maintenance and update. And so I don't know, one way to think through this is that if they're already doing all this data work, we can add additional kind of components to that, and they're the people communicating with the web hosts or the data science presentation people, and they're doing the data maintenance, and then maybe we have somebody who's helping to push data.
should chart that out. That's a good description. The other thing you can plug in is a well-being index. There's lots of other data.
Right. So just, I mean, the more, having a funnel of data, going to somebody who's organizing it, cleaning it, and then going to someone else who's visualizing it and hosting it.
But I think Lacey raises a good point. When you do this kind of work, it's always good to have focus groups working in various sections.
Sure.
One would be business, one would be infrastructure, one would be people or demographics, one would be culture, one would be
Right.
parks and rec potentially. And focus, and health is a big one. Health is lots of data with health. And they tend to anchor these kinds of things in my experience, because
What
they
do you
get a
mean by
lot of
anchoring?
they just hang on. They have good trends, the good information. And people, when they want to come to a town, they want to know how healthy the area is, if there's a hospital there, those kinds of, clinics response, that high schools are really important too. The educational component's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that really draws people. And nowadays in the economy that we're in with the high tech, people come to a place that they can work anywhere. And why
Right.
not work in the places that have all of those services? So.
Right.
And I know we have that, people knocking on the door anyway.
Sure.
Research and development, like coming in, these are high paying jobs, but they want to be in a place that's got services. And I realize we have some challenges with that.
Yeah.
We're small.
Um,
But that focus group discussion part of it's a really good dynamic to build as building blocks. It gets everybody involved too.
Okay. So I guess my question really is on that is, does that need to be basically a separate planning exercise for that specific kind of like?
I would put it
data
into the
dashboard that go-
master. I'd put it into the master
Okay.
plan. I would actually because these things are out there right now.
Yeah.
I would get the dashboard going right away.
That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things. It's like I haven't put it on my to-do list yet. So, the last thing I wanted to mention is what is the typical timeline for a master plan? Like, are we forecasting 5, 10?
10 months, 12 months.
Oh, not for completion, but for, we are
Longevity.
aiming
5
to
years.
achieve these goals by how long?
2 to 5 years. Yeah.
Okay, so
You'd
it's
have-
relatively
You
short.
probably
term.
have 2 to 5 year kind of project scenarios. Yeah.
Okay,
And then you'd update the master plan, or the general plan, I should say, with the master plan. So once you
as
get,
it's re-updated.
yeah.
Because the general plan is a 20-year horizon, is that?
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, the only reason it's 20 years, because you'd revisit every 5, because it's, what is it, 2012? It's 9 years now. And it's terrible, really. I think.
Right.
But anyway, so we're revisiting it. So it depends on the plan. August, that's a good question.
Okay.
The reason I say 20, the reason most planners say 20 is, the question is, what do you want to look like in 20 years?
Right.
What do you want to look like in 5? It's too close. What do you look like in 10? That's too close too. And I always say, it's better to look backwards and say, can you remember 20 years before? No, you probably can't remember 20 years before. But a lot of people can remember 20 years, and it goes by
But
pretty
it's a
fast.
generation.
So in 20 years, a lot of things in one generation, a lot of things happen. And if you look around Moab, I'm sure you could see, look back, most people could look back 20 years and see what's happened.
Sure.
So in that period of time, it may seem long, but there's a lot of things that change. And that's why you want to have that long horizon scenario, just so that you can think about dreaming, because really that's what you're doing, putting ideals out there.
Right.
Very high level ideals. A strategic plan like the county commission is considering is very similar to that, and very high level, outcome based, but and very far reaching, running at 30,000 feet. And then you can start drilling down. The beauty of a general plan is it's all idealistic. There's no budget assigned to it.
Sure.
You can put all these things together and just put projects. And a transportation master plan will come out with $20 million projects.
Sure.
An economic development master plan might come out with $10 or $15 million
Sure.
kinds of things. You're not gonna do that overnight. So how long do you think you'll do that? 10 years, 15, 20 years probably. And that'll all plug back into the general plan as comprehensively as you can get it.
Right.
If that helps, I'm not sure. The 5 years, it might be a bit short. If it's a really good master plan, it might be a little longer than that.
Okay. Cool. Well, before we move on, is there any other follow-up questions kind of on this as like a priority that was identified that we're moving forward with right now during this meeting?
Hey, Gabe, just as chair, we can pin this for later. It might be worth its own conversation in a future agenda. But John raised technology workers in particular in this like remote revolution. There's some pretty significant trade-offs to bringing in those higher wage workers as far as competition on, housing competition for stock. We've seen the van life issues as far as quality of life. And if it's something we want to lean into, how do we put resources into competing for those people versus providing goods for our existing base? And I've seen this as something that a lot of communities are struggling with today because they didn't anticipate it. And we are already seeing the crunch of that. I think it might be worth having a roundtable conversation about that. In particular, trying to pull out the threads of where we need to make some principles or adopt some principles as a community about where we think we want to flex now as we ramp up some of these planning documents that can help us make more long-term decisions. But I just didn't want to leave that one on the table because it's a lurker. It's a snake in the grass.
I agree 100%. I've been thinking the same thing because it also doesn't really solve workforce problems at all. It just kind of exacerbates problems.
Yep. So I think that's a perfect example of something that I think would be key for the master plan, having that round table being a component of that and an input to that, because I think that is a trend and we need to figure out what is our strategy with the resources we have available or will have available in the future to do that. And is that something we're trying to address? Is that something we need to actually plan to have impacts mitigated from? Or is there an element of that we can lean into that is helpful? I mean, one instinct while we're talking about it, and I think Leanne is going to talk about this, I just got to unmute, is leveraging something like USU's Rural Online Initiative program to upskill the people we already have here, plug into the remote economy, provide some more choice in employment, and increasing wages, which still has trade-offs because folks who are here who already are hiring would say that, well, that's pulling my workers away. But I mean, to me, our job as a kind of the economic development ecosystem is to provide people with choices and kind of options. But anyway, I know that that's kind of my view of that situation. And if we are to lean into it, my instinct would be education and opportunity rather than bringing people here. But Leanna.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is to use that, that remote opportunity to, provide choices for the folks who are already here. Yeah.
But it does raise a workforce development and availability side concern. And I think that all has to be out in the open as we're having this conversation during the planning process. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, one of the goals with the land use strategy, just to revisit this, is to chart out three scenarios. And scenario planning is very common nowadays. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, both on a low, medium, and high growth strategy. I'm assuming we'll end up intuitively on a low level. Lots of jurisdictions do this, especially resort communities, and think about where growth can occur and should occur, and then really get ahead of the curve with commissions, both commissions, and thinking of having, when development comes here, they have much more predictable outcomes, because right now they're not very predictable. And we really need to make them a lot more long-range predictable, and then they need to be entitled within the land use code.
Right.
And those references really need a lot of attention. Sure.
All right, last chance to talk about planning before we move on to this grant program. Seeing none, I'm moving on. Or I'd say, since we're under the larger bullet, I'm going to say we can. I don't know, Mr. Chair, if I'm allowed to do that, but
Please carry on.
Carry on. All right, carrying on. So this is the other kind of main prioritized action priority out of the workshop from a couple weeks ago, which is designing a local diversified business expansion grant program. So this would be for, and there's some questions on here, but basically the vision would be putting expansion seed money into non-tourism businesses in the community, or at least businesses that have the, maybe tourism is helping them with street traffic, but they're going to expand e-commerce or exporting products or having services that they can sell elsewhere, but work here as a part of that. And I think one of the first questions is designing it in terms of what does that financial kind of product look like? Is it a grant? Is it a rotating loan fund? Is it a mixture of both? We pinned this last time because it was just prioritizing this as a bigger picture idea, but I wanted to have some conversation about the pros and cons of kind of those various options. Grants are easy and fast from our perspective as administrators of the program. And they're the most attractive. Free money is always the most attractive. Rotating loan fund has benefits in terms of keeping money circulating in the community longer. We know this money is going to keep coming in the door with diversification for at least a couple of years, and maybe longer if we can prove to the legislature that it's effective. But keeping it coming back is always good, and making it competitive product. Maybe certain people aren't creditworthy and they're not able to get a loan. Or maybe they are, and we have like the lowest 0 to very super low interest on that, or some combination where the grant is kind of the bringing you in the door, and then the rest of the money is making sure you hit the metrics that we're hoping to boost, whether that be high paying job growth or increase in salary. That's kind of, so I guess the main question is, how do people feel about the design of it, whether it be grant or rotating loan fund or combination of the two?
I appreciate and agree sort of with your analysis of the two options between a grant and the RLF. I would say that, in terms of the capacity of your office and the administrative necessities associated with the RLF. It seems, you may or may not agree that it seems that perhaps trying to draw up a quick grant program, though it's not as though that's something that's necessarily super simple either, in terms of promoting that and getting the word out and providing a level playing field for all potential applicants. But however, that does seem like it would sort of have a more discrete start and end point that perhaps could be more comfortable for you and your office. And so, I think that, that's something that I support. I'm definitely really supportive of. I would say that in RLF, I think, in especially using your description of, how the kind of the money stays flowing within the community. And I think that that's, really has the potential to make a really compelling case for the future sort of the future use and allotment and allocation of these funds. So I think that could really be, that has the potential perhaps to be more deep and powerful than the sort of a one-time shot for a business that obviously we wouldn't have much control over how the grant funds would sort of ultimately result in success or not for a business. Of course, the same can be said for the RLF funds as well. So I would say I lean in the grants direction myself.
Can I ask a needs question here?
Shoot.
What is the need? Have we identified the needs? And maybe I'm missing that. So is the need
Yeah, that's a good point.
the best in the retail area, or is it in, what sector is it in? Is it industrial? Is it in the?
Well, from purely anecdotal out there, and I'll let Lacey speak to this as well, but some of the needs that I've seen is a lack of available space. And so this money could go towards the development of commercial space or the expansion of commercial space that
That's
already
expensive.
exists. It is expensive. And so in that case, this would only be a part of it.
Even if it was a design or in preliminary design.
Yeah. So I guess one example of that that's concrete is that there's a small concentration of kind of cottage manufacturers of outdoor gear on Cane Creek, 420 Cane Creek, where there is a raft gear welding company, raft gear soft good company, and that there's a local handmade bike manufacturer who's looking to build a kind of a wing in that area to move out of his garage and hire folks. So kind of a light manufacturing angle, and that could be that kind of helped me think through an option that would fit the community and needs that are out there.
Just wondering if it's helpful to have a group that actually helps people that are in need within the county, or at least a team, because planning is a big part of breaking down barriers. Sometimes we create barriers too, of course.
Sure.
But breaking down those barriers and building too,
Mhm.
and fire, because
Yeah.
sometimes those are seen as barriers and people get scared.
You mean within like the permitting process
Yeah,
and the
so
red tape?
just thinking, well, I want to move into a warehouse. What do I need to do? And maybe the use doesn't comply.
Sure.
And they need somebody to help them. We just call us like a SWAT team to
Yeah.
work together to break down those barriers. Maybe that's not a cost necessarily, although it's staff cost, but.
Well, and part of that is, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but how having a full-time business technical assistance person
Right.
who's able to help walk people through these
Yeah.
and do the strategy and the planning. And here's my business idea. Here's what I'm thinking of expanding. That might be in our office. That might be in USU. We've been talking a lot about that. But Lacey, do you have any kind of thoughts here?
My only thoughts are, well, I agree 100% with the space. Commercial space seems to be a really big problem, especially I would say for like mechanics, because they need a lot of space, right? And they have a really hard time finding anything like that. But like you said, the money's not going to go very far for something like that unless it was towards a lease or something like that.
Right.
The other thing that I would say is I guess we need to be clear about the businesses who can apply, because if this is, diversification money can't be used for tourism,
Yeah.
outdoor gear, I mean, is that mean gearheads could, potentially
Right.
apply? I mean, there is a fine line there, even retail space, because I do see a need for retail space, but you can't say that retail is not tourism or
Well,
is tourism
yeah.
without opening like a can of worms.
I think it's a very important point is scoping who is eligible.
Yeah.
And because there's a lot of, so I guess the way I've been thinking about it is there's kind of three categories. There's businesses that rely explicitly on transient guests to provide all of their revenue. So like Moab Adventure Center isn't going to make $1 unless they're like selling merch to somebody who's been there before, right? Versus someone like Wild Raven Soap Company might sell like 50, somewhere between 40 to 60%, like online or at kind of craft fairs and stuff like that. But they're also going to get a lot of their support from foot traffic to their store during the tourist season. And so they're kind of a mix. And then there's people who are completely exporting their goods and services and requiring nobody to physically move through the community in order to get their product, get their revenue. And I
Right.
think that's the intention from the creation of this funding is
Right.
to try to,
I'm just saying, like, we definitely need to be
Yep.
careful, because even you mentioned Moab Adventure Center, they also sell shoes to quite a few locals, actually, like
Right.
outdoor shoes. And I mean, you're just gonna get that, what is tourism, what isn't, you know how hard it is to identify
Yeah.
one way or another. So if we're gonna do these grants, I mean,
that has to be really clear
yeah,
and fair.
yeah.
Sure.
And I'd plus one that, and I'd just share, I think it would be helpful to get very clear on what the intent is that we want to see as far as the, outcome of this. Is it really just open-ended to local businesses? Are we incentivized towards job creation? Are we incentivized towards new manufacturing opportunities and scale that can create more resilience? Because that could also affect the businesses that apply and are eligible to apply, and how we qualify where the money goes.
And job creation, I would even say, certain levels of job creation might be important as well. Are we just creating more of the level that we don't have any employees for
Right.
already? Or, I mean,
Well, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And basically kind of my first thoughts, and these were all questions I had on here, so I appreciate for bringing this up. A model that it's at the state level, which would help justify the use of the funds, because the state code basically says that this tax money has to be used in some way that's similar to the state economic development programs. The Rural Economic Development Initiative grant, the READY grant, basically is a post-performance that if you create a job in the area, you get basically their first year's wages back in the grant, so long as they make 110% of average industry wage in the community, or not industry wage, it's average wage in the community. And they've also had that where it's like the grant has to go towards the purchase of some kind of productive machinery or material that from an economic theory standpoint, you increase productivity, you can hire more people.
I saw that grant, and one thing, I do like that grant. One thing I don't like about it is all of the exclusions that they made, and I'm sure
Yeah.
that, they're way
There's just politicking going on.
more researched than I am, but I noticed that they excluded construction from
Yeah.
that, and that is actually an industry that I think we should try to bolster and
Right.
incentivize here.
Yeah, I don't know the logic behind
So
it.
I asked her, and she said just because those are generally like high turnover,
Sure.
they're always hiring anyway, that kind of thing. But I think if we could get construction companies to keep loyal, and really train these people up, I just think it's something we should
Yeah.
try to incentivize.
Totally.
So-
No, I agree.
Yeah.
So I guess
Just
I
Adding to that really quick, because our situation is slightly different, I think it's also worth this, to the extent that we can control it, incentivizing that those jobs be filled by people who currently live and work in Grand County. So just
Yeah.
another thing to consider. We don't want to be incentivizing job creation that adds more people to the county and doesn't solve problems for real people who live here today.
And I was saying, if we want this to be ongoing, I think some effort up front is gonna go a long way. planning
Right.
this out.
Totally. Yeah, which raises the question, you know, we're doing the strategic master plan so that we have some thought and some time for engagement. And the idea behind this grant program was to just start something. And so where's the chicken, where's the egg there? So yeah, I just know that, you know, Chris is prioritizing getting some money to the community as quickly as possible and just starting the ball rolling. But I want to make sure that we're not rolling a bad ball. But I think these are, I mean, I have these questions down and we'll have to do more thought. So I want to keep identifying, you know, things that we need to keep working on. And maybe there needs to be like another workshop that we really drill down on just this particular subject matter.
What's your timing? Can I ask? Is it like immediate? or-
So we won't get the money until the budget's passed at the end of the year.
Okay,
So we could launch it in the new year.
could you? So
That's
why
really
don't you do it
possible.
after the forum then?
Well, that would make a ton of sense for launching the program at the business
And
development.
then having that as part of the discussion of the forum?
Yeah, and to this kind of, I think Elaine really struggled with the idea of moving towards diversification. It's kind of unfair in that tourism industry is excluded from that. So if you're in a, you know, mom and pop t-shirt shop on Main Street, and you're like, well, I could buy another screen printer and that would allow me to hire another person. Why am I not able to use this money? I think something that the Travel Council Advisory Board brought up is a program to basically, under the tourism promotion mandate, provide some grant funding for tourism industry companies to use marketing. So it'd be targeting small kind of basically just local tourism businesses in the community to take advantage of that TRT marketing spend. This was actually brought up by the GM of the Hoodoo, Daniel Loveridge, because, you know, his organization has a lot of resources and they can market on top of what we can for the community of Moab in general. And so to me, thinking about, okay, here's something for both sides that fits the code. I mean, who knows if this will get like approved by the commission, but you know, that we could launch, here's this thing for folks on this side of the economy, and here's this other thing that we can also use for other folks, just to, from a fairness standpoint, it's not perfect, but to try to maintain the priority and the mandate of the commission, as well as trying to meet the needs of the larger community, would be kind of a thought.
So tourism is excluded, but value-added tourism wouldn't be? So you could produce products that could be not just local, that could be exported or used
So
somewhere
I
else. So
think-
the t-shirt one's a
yeah.
good one. Although Moab t-shirts, I guess you wouldn't export somewhere.
Right, so I guess it's like, it could, I mean, a part of it could potentially be like, maybe your core business requires foot traffic, but if you're like, okay, I'm thinking of maybe doing an e-commerce thing, that perhaps we could design this in such a way that you could be eligible for this funding specifically to add an e-commerce strategy to your existing tourism business, right? Because that's not inducing transit guest traffic. We're relying on foot traffic, but kind of value add. And I think that, I mean, it'll have to pass the commission test. Dave, I keep referencing the commission in this like ambiguous way. I want to acknowledge you're here. Yeah. So I mean, I think that's a great point, and I think that could help clarify eligible options there.
Can I just say, if we could start by declaring an intent, because this is when we could just chase our tails all day long. And I know we're not here for this meeting in particular, but I would say one of the first steps I'd love to do is say, like, what is the outcome? What is our hypothesis for what we think this money will do? And
Yeah.
where are we willing to draw the line around that? Because, you know, the debate on, you know, does it help to invest in tourism, you know, companies or not? They hire real people. Those real people are here. They need money.
Yep.
I think declaring our intent is the number one thing, because that's going to help us make more principled decisions, not kind of this ad hoc.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my read of the room, not this room, but the larger room, is that the intent of the diversification money specifically is to increase basically the amount of economic activity that isn't tied to transient guests, right? So basically, the intent in this case would be you're increasing the amount of payroll that is going to, that does not require an additional person to like come to the community and kind of stress our infrastructure and public lands and all of that. But not, so that's like, to me, my understanding of the goal. And then, so interpreting that into this particular program is that you're increasing the payroll that is not reliant on transient guests. That help? Does that, thoughts on that? For better or for worse?
My
That's
first
read.
question is like, so like the goods, the gear, right?
Sure.
Is that considered, I mean, technically those businesses aren't gonna buy that product unless there's a transient room. And I'm just thinking like, this is what businesses are gonna think. I mean,
Yeah.
businesses are gonna be like, how can I get that money?
Yeah. Of course. No,
And they're,
totally-
you know, and that's what they're gonna look for. And so, so yeah, so I would say outdoor gear, is that considered something that, is that in our diversification pot?
Right. Well, so I mean, I would think that my thinking to your answer, and then I'm going to follow up with, I think, how people would maybe try to get around it,
Right.
is that if the intention is to develop basically an economy in which we export goods and services and bring in revenue from other places without the associated impacts of visitation, that it would have to be some kind of proof of like an increase in sales or revenue that is not coming from transient guests. How do you prove that? Address isn't useful because they're going to come here, and if they're here, their address is going to be somewhere else. You could have it like just an online sale, but then you're like, oh, can you just do this online sale if you're in person, in terms of trying to game it? But I like, yeah, it is a great question. I don't.
I mean, I don't know if we need to clarify further, or if we just
But I
You know,
think-
call
we-
that intent good, you know, but that's the first question that pops in my mind.
Are we not feeding off best practices too? Because the business retention expansion programs exist in lots of models
Right.
across the country.
Yep.
So why not just grab something that's got a best practice
Yeah,
to it and start
great point.
feeding off of it?
And I think the problem is going to be that that's typically agnostic of industry, but maybe not. Maybe there's
No.
industry specific business expansion
Yeah.
or tangent.
There's lots of resort communities that be in the same boat.
Okay.
The other one is succession planning. I'm not sure if you take a look at business succession planning, and where maybe we don't have that here, where we have people that are aging inside there and they want to eventually, you want to hold on to those kinds of businesses.
Well, who's going to run Store No More when Joe decides not to run it?
Do you have any, because that is a good
Yes.
model, national model. I don't
Yeah,
know.
no, I don't have, no.
You
I
don't,
mean, there could be, I mean, you raise a good point. It's an
Yeah.
alternative thing, like almost like the Leadership Academy, or it's like, here's young up and coming business folks who want to take over businesses that
Yeah.
could age,
Mhm.
retire, and leave.
You know, at one point we did have that, what do we call it? Gain. Oh, I don't remember. Zachariah started a
Yeah, I
group
know
that
you're
was,
talking about it, I
yeah.
can't remember what it stands
It was something to do with, and it was, you know, young entrepreneurs, mentor them with older, you know, business. But I mean, it wasn't necessarily succession, but it was definitely pairing the two. I don't know if we want to
but
look into
that
that
business
again.
one exists nationally as a model.
Right.
We used to use it in Canada all the time, and they came out of Texas, actually, so they traveled the country doing these presentations. In fact, they're online now, most of them, too, so that's.
Right.
I will say, I guess, outside of thinking so into the weeds of like gaming the system and all of that, I think there are examples of other folks in the community that like are pretty clearly like non-tourism related. And I think maybe just starting from existing businesses. I don't know if it's one way to go. It's just literally, here's a list of businesses.
I think that's-
These are eligible, you're not eligible. And here's why. And that's one way to go. Or it could
Basically,
be,
do
it
that
could be,
like in
makes
10
it-
minutes.
could be industry code. It could be just by industry code. That's one way to do it. Anyway, any other thoughts on this kind of like, you know, the actual mission of this? I know the original ordinance was really focusing on basically the gap between pay and quality or cost of living And that really a lot of the intent is to try to just increase the overall wage in the community in a lot of ways to address that disparity between wage and cost. So, I mean, that's not tourism related, but I think we're being asked to make this very much a non-tourism economic development strategy.
So I'd like to suggest we do the timing thing, wait till the budget's approved. Don't lose the money, of course, you want that.
Okay.
Work
my
with
eyes on it.
Lacey especially, and then try to put something together for the forum and draft something up, scope best practices, here's the scope.
Aim for that to be the launch
That's what I
point.
would say. I don't know when the forum, is it February?
February 7th,
Yeah, see,
but that
that's
kind
soon.
of lines up.
Yeah.
Leanna.
I was just gonna say, if if the point is to diversify, right? The idea is to expand beyond, so I'm okay with that, but qualifying that ahead of time and making that clear up front.
Right.
And if there are other resources then that are for tourism based, to be fair, that would be probably easier to swallow.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately I'm an administrator with some massaging power, but not a decision-making power really. So, I'm trying to do my best to make sure that everything works best possible. But not to say that, I totally get where everybody's coming from. I think these all have a lot of really good reasons for why it's happening.
I think if our intent is, the wage gap kind of thing, then it would make sense to, follow that. It's not GOED anymore, but whatever that state program is that
Right.
for new hires of it, maybe a certain income level. I mean,
Right.
that makes sense then, but I mean, I guess you would have to say, but not if you're in tourism. I don't know.
Something like that, right? Yeah, and I think
Might be hard, but
right. I think Chris has made it fairly clear that the intent is to expand non-tourism businesses. So interpreting the ordinance versus the intent, I think is a trick. But I think I have a pretty good list of questions that need to be defined, and we'll go back to this meeting and kind of capture all of that and start starting to scope this out more. And then maybe we need to do kind of a follow-up workshop style thing in which we really nail down the design and we do some work ahead of time and do some more fine-tooth combing.
Some draft material.
Yeah, some drafts. We'll bring a draft. There you go. A couple other things on here. So should this be a grant, RLF, or combination? That's a question mark. Which metrics we're explicitly intending to boost? What is the hypothesis, basically? The other question really is that, to me, I could see this money being used here. Here's a 100 grand, and somebody's looking to buy a condo for their employees, and this can help support that. And that could hypothetically increase the wage or increase an employee. But I'm also pretty sure that the state said no housing expenditure related on this. So I probably need to go talk to the attorney and see what her interpretation is and what she's comfortable inviting litigation on. But anyway, that's something that comes to mind, whether or not that ends up in the program. What does the sector restriction look like? How to design that? How much money total? So my instinct is this is like 10K to 100K range of grants, and it could be, we're thinking of 5 small, 5 big, or you can apply for anyone, any size, but everybody will apply for the most almost always. So I don't know if that's actually useful. Maybe thinking of tranches where there's 3 tranches amounts that people can apply for. And then doing marketing, launching it at the summit, I think makes a ton of sense. Do we want to require folks to spend their money within a certain amount of time? Leave it open. How do you get all the money up front? Is there a post-performance element of it? What does the application look like? What does the reporting look like? And in terms of with the commission, do we need to sign it off as a whole pot of money, or does it need to be approved on an awardee basis? that's my list of questions I need to do some legwork on. Am I missing anything?
No, I just think that all this stuff is really important because we do scholarships a lot, and when it becomes really subjective, it gets very challenging and difficult, and that's where you have issues. And so if we can make it very clear, these are things that qualify, and then like the first one that comes in that qualifies, it just makes it really simple. So if we can have that nicely spelled out beforehand,
Yeah.
It'll make it easy and, less painful.
Yeah.
Quick
think-
question.
Yeah.
Are we anticipating that this is going to be an annual re-up? I thought we talked about that, but I can't recall if the answer was absolutely yes.
That is another question. Do we want this to be a one-off program or a continuing program? And how
Because
does that affect design?
there's the possibility of adding less restrictions up front, but making it more like a pilot program. So smaller grants, less boundaries to get in, see what kind of results we get, and then expand from there versus try to put more restrictions up front and possibly limit the impact of that initial tranche because we didn't pilot
Great
it.
point.
So I think that's a worthy trade-off to consider.
We did do also worth mentioning is that we did do a much smaller with a max award of $5,000. Kind of, it was more kind of relief in the COVID era with the Rural County Grant Program, which we have more money for. So we have actually good information about who applied to that information, what they used it for, how effective it was. So we have some kind of like somewhat of a pilot data, but not quite aimed at this diversification target. That was really any organization and pretty open-ended in terms of the impacts intended there. I think the other thing I wanted to mention is, I've been trying to think a lot about how do we make it an equitable program and how do we try to invite folks who might have a difficulty accessing capital historically, as well as those who might not have the accounting background or financial, not to know what a P&L is or be able to put that together, and trying to make sure that we're kind of thinking through the application frictions that might exclude folks who would be perfectly eligible but otherwise, don't have all the advantages to apply right up front. I've been thinking about that. Part of that is just awareness and availability and working with, some of our service providers in those communities locally, and just doing intentional outreach and kind of program explanation. Here's how you can reach out for help, all that kind of stuff. But that would be another thing that I'd want to flag as well. Anything else on this?
Great, thanks, August. Yeah, it sounds like you have some, some more information to gather, and whether we use perhaps the November or December meeting, maybe we could just focus on this entirely, or if we need a separate workshop, let's just continue that discussion. So let's move on to funding and citing the business technical assistance position within Grand County.
Awesome. So we've been having conversations with a lot of people. I guess context. So historically, there's been an SBDC, they called it the Business Resource Center at USU, in which there was two part-time positions. One that managed the state-funded custom fit program, which provides training reimbursements. Basically, it helps get businesses who want to do training programs for their employees or staff money so they can go get trained. And then there's the Business Resource Center, which is kind of more open-ended. The idea is that folks could go and get their business questions answered, get access to resources, help think through their business plan. And that has been historically cited at USU Moab, which is similar to the model throughout the rest of the state, where there's many communities that have this amenity, and they're often funded through a hodgepodge of sources. Leanna, am I missing anything in terms of historical context here?
Well, I don't know. I don't fully understand it. I don't know if you guys remember Beth McHugh, any of you, but she was phenomenal, right? It's the person who's in that position. She was really great. She helped a lot of businesses start up. She was equitable, super helpful. And I've always really appreciated having that under our roof, you know. But you know, a part-time person, we have difficulty finding a part-time person. So I knew that I don't run this program. It's run, I believe that the small business, the SBDC thing is a state, right? And that the contract went to Extension in USU because they have outreach and they have offices in every county, basically.
Yeah, so this is where it gets a little confusing because basically there's federal money through the SBA, Small Business Administration.
Uh-huh.
And they have a nationwide, well, they have a state office, which is up in Salt Lake, and they manage funding for all of these small business development centers throughout the state.
Okay, so it's federal, but I think though still like within the state, it's managed largely through our USU's Extension, most
There's
of
a
it.
handful that is in USU, like the one in Kanab and St. George's through
Okay,
Dixie State, and it's now Utah Polytechnic something State University, confusing name.
but I think it has to be partnering with some institution. It's not just a standalone, right?
Right. So, yeah, so that's how it's worked historically. And then there's kind of just like a million different sub-programs with like a handful of funding, kind of in the amounts of like 5 to 10 grand to help support the facilitation of those programs. Custom Fit being one, that's a state thing.
And SIT, short-term intensive training.
Yes, yeah, there's all these little things. And basically, one model is what San Juan County did, which was at their extension office in Landing for their SBDC, they put together kind of all of these various different funding streams to fund one full-time position. So that's Megan McFall, who's currently actually serving the Grand County area in the absence of a position for us. And she's great. She's wonderful. She's really brought a lot of life to that program. And she's been really an advocate for our area. And some of the complaints that she's had is that just basically that money, both the Custom Fit and the SBDC money, was regionally going to Price, and then from Price to the rest of southeastern Utah. And she felt that kind of Price was favoring Carbon and Emory, and it didn't go over. She called I-70 the Mason-Dixon line in that way, and that it stayed kind of in Emory and Carbon. It didn't really make it down here. So she's been a huge advocate for that, and now they actually split that region. So Megan's now the regional contact for San Juan and Grand. So we'll be working with her closely no matter what. But the conversation here, and it kind of started originally, is that, okay, let's cobble together all of this money and these funding streams, send it at USU, as historically has been the case, and then we will provide whatever funding is necessary to make that full-time, hit the salary and benefit marks that we need, and make it a competitive position, help with recruitment, and make that a really good resource for this. And a handful of things happened, but basically that's one option. And then the other one that I think Chris has been thinking about more so without kind of seeing the larger system is just adding a position in the county in our office that would fill this role, and that we would kind of hold that position, provide those resources, and then try to manage all those programs and all the funding streams that have come into it. And that was kind of received with some eyebrow raises because I guess pretty much always this SBDC position is hosted within a system of an institution of higher learning, because there's an education component to it. It's just kind of how the network is built. And so there's kind of some questions about the details, but the bottom line is that we're trying to budget at least 100 grand. We're budgeting 100 grand into out of the diversification million to ensure that position gets funded and created, and hopefully. Anyway, I don't know if I have any asks of this body, but I think it's important to this whole conversation of diversification and what we're planning to spend the diversification money on.
So again, is that like 100,000 annually?
we only budget a year at a time, which is a trick.
That's a trick.
So, I mean, we could say, we could write an MOU or a contract that's like, we're committing to funding this over multiple years.
Right,
But it would still only be the yearly amount for this year, so that we're able to still fund everything else we want to spend next year. But we could commit, we could hypothetically commit up front and say, we have 5 years for this, we're guaranteed going to get this diversification money for 5 years. We could say, we're committing to this funding for 5 years. I'd have to check with Chris on that. We could do that. It's probably better than not doing that.
Yep.
and so, I mean, I can see the benefits of leaving it under the network of SBDC, because they do, I mean, they already do it all
Yeah,
around,
yeah.
you know what I mean, rather than.
Well, and
trying
I'd
to-
rather, if I'm going to be totally honest, I'd rather not manage this position.
Right.
I'd rather be kind of.
Rather than trying to like
Maybe the
reinvent
person-
the wheel, start from scratch, all of that makes sense to me. I'm wondering, and this is just like, I haven't thought through this idea, so I hope it doesn't sound stupid, but is this something that if it doesn't seem to fit that, hey, we're gonna fund this for somebody else, would it make sense that, you know, we make a grant that that they could apply for and it funds it that way? I don't know, just a thought,
Sure,
you know?
could be that.
Just
way.
if it doesn't make sense the other way, but to me, it makes sense to keep it under USU, SBDC and all of that. And if the only way, I don't know, Leanna, do they, I mean, in Blanding, they were able to pull together the money for a full-time, it's just that just not an option here?
Well, I mean, so, you know, coming in, I never fully understood how this worked, right? And I'm like, okay, because they report to Price, you know, folks in Price, and it's somebody above that in extension, and I never, you know, and all the cobbled pieces of money, and I never fully had a very good grasp of what it was. But there is potential to find, I mean, so I guess that's why I thought about, like, you know, where's some other funding that comes from. I'm happy to provide an office. And we have a system that already works here. When Beth was here, she was a great support to the community. Everyone knew and loved her. Right? You knew her, right? When she was
Yeah.
working. And it was a really good resource. And I just thought, well, if we're struggling to find someone, you know, this half-time partial thing, she was retired. She only wanted to be part-time. I thought, well, maybe if somebody's full-time. So that's when I went to August. And I think it sort of stirred the pot a little bit, but I still think there's nothing wrong with being creative and try to figure this out, because in the end, really what we need to do is serve that's all I care about, right?
Yeah.
Is that the community served? And however that's going to work the best. I'm happy to, you know, keep that office. And I love having people coming into the university and seeing it. But you know, I don't know. We are there are elements of education. And so if there's somebody sort of in here when, you know, Nara or Kathy Lacey that was here before and did some of these custom fit trainings here in the university, and we have the resources and stuff for that, it would be a little bit more challenging, I think, if it's somebody outside. But maybe, you know, maybe you can still do the 100, I don't know. And again, I'm still talking before I think this through, but, you know, maybe we have this position that's with the county, and it would complement the halftime SBDC position that was still here. And then we'd have even more resource. I don't know. I mean, I think it's worth continuing to have a conversation.
And can you tell me, like, because that position is open right now, right, as part-time?
It's not, well, because it's not available to apply for because of all this exploring options. Right. So I don't want to put, you know, well, they don't want to put it out there as halftime when, oh, we can be full-time, and we, you know, we don't get the right fit. So we're just trying to figure out what the job is before we put it out there for application, I guess.
And has recruitment, because it has been open in the, like, you know, off and on a little bit, is the recruitment, I mean, are you seeing that it would be better as full-time? That's the number one problem with the.
I don't know. So for example, Beth, you know, she wanted to retire. She retired from Zions Bank. And she had all this knowledge and desire, but she wanted to start spending time with her grandkids. So she wanted halftime. That was perfect for her.
Right.
And I think there might be other people in the community, they just do want to do this a part-time piece.
Mhm.
right? And so I really don't know what the best, what the
I think
best.
the thing with Beth and or what I've heard is that yes, she was part-time, but she brought the energy of a full-time
Yeah.
employee.
Oh my gosh, she
Yeah.
was incredible.
That was great.
Right. And we did hire during COVID, right? When COVID, hit, Beth stepped down and we hired someone. But it was during COVID and it was just hard, and 2020 doesn't count for anything,
Right.
that was just a tough year. And so the position is vacant again now. And so we're just trying to figure out how to make it work best. And I just thought being on this council and knowing that the county's wanting to provide support, hey, here might be an idea. And so I think it's worth continuing to pursue that. I don't have any idea how you'd figure out if should be a part-time or a full-time. I don't know. I don't know who's out there. So, some, you might know, Lacey. Do you want a part-time or a full-time?
I think everybody needs someone to work part-time or full-time right now, for sure.
Mhm.
But I just knew that, there was discussions of hiring someone from Price, and I wondered if because it was part-time, if that was the problem, if it was not the problem.
No, it's just trying to figure out what's best. We
Yeah.
we can decide to move forward tomorrow and open the position for a part-time,
Right.
right? But full-time is 3 times that amount of money, right? So it's the other half of the hours plus the benefits, which is
Yeah.
40 something percent, 48% at USU. So,
It'd probably be similar.
yeah. So it's just that much more money. And so it's always hard to get a full-time position to be able to pay those benefits.
Yeah.
And I think my understanding of the value of the full-time is that, if you're from the user, the client perspective, if you're starting a business, you've got an idea or you have a grant that's got a deadline, having someone who's in an office in a real place that can
Available.
take appointments and
All the time.
and then
Mhm.
all the time availability is huge, but also like planning and putting together workshops and doing all of that kind of other stuff.
Yeah, besides just the meetings with the people. And
Right.
you're right, but we knew that when Beth was gone, we need to understand that we are never going to have another Beth.
Right, exactly.
There's
I
no
mean-
way.
Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of where all that's at. Emily, I think you had your hand raised a minute ago. No?
If I did, it was an accident. I'm just
Okay.
listening.
The other thing I wanted to mention, I think the other kind of thought process kind of from Chris's angle was that, the county is going through a process in which we're kind of redoing our organizational chart as we're planning to build a new building. And as a part of that, I think part of the vision was, a one-stop shop business resource center that could be a part of the actual county building. So, if we had this position, it being there, being next to the place where you get your business permit, being next to the place where you apply for a grant and talk to the people who are doing that stuff, kind of made a lot of sense from like, almost a product development or service development.
I agree. And that would be a great service to folks that, to have everything in one place, and that would free up an office for a new faculty member here.
Sure.
you know.
So anyway, that's kind of their angle. So I think there's still some things we need to work out exactly, but just putting that out there is how we're going to probably spend some of this money ideally. And I think that the timeline is really important. I didn't really think about that. In terms of how long are we really committing to this if we take this on? Any other thoughts on this before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I guess on that last note, like, it seems as long as these funds are freed up, the TRT funds are freed up, it certainly seems like it could be a worthy use of that amount of funds. But yeah, that's all I had. I just wanted to add that in. It looks like we're ready to move on to the next item, discussing the new state redeveloping matching grant. Take it away again, August.
Okay, so I wanted to bring this up. This got mentioned. I knew this was coming. I didn't know when. When I was in Cedar City for the One Utah Summit, I asked our state representative Carl Albrecht, appreciate your flexibility on TRT and how it's being spent. And we're really, pushing this diversification thing, but we're seeing across the board, regardless of industry, that housing is one of our #1 concerns, and we don't have any state resources to deal with that. And his response actually was, he was like, "Wow, I don't think 95 was good, and we should be doing more tourism promotion anyway." So that was interesting to hear him say that. But the executive director of Go Utah, formerly Go Ed, now Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, launched this redeveloping matching grant. So the state legislature appropriated $35 million. And basically the way that they are thinking through this is that if a land use authority, my understanding is that would be the planning and zoning department of either the city or the county, basically upzones a piece of land that's currently zoned commercial, industrial, or retail, undeveloped land that's currently zoned commercial, industrial, or retail, to a zone that allows for the development of residential units as a permitted use at a minimum of 8 units per acre, demonstrate the approval of the development application with the corresponding residential component, then we can receive a grant up to $2.5 million to match a similar amount of funding on a qualifying project. So basically, the legislature's goal here is to increase the amount of developable land for residential, relatively dense residential usage. And so I've shared this with John, and I think, and the city as well. And I think that the next step is just an inventory of what parcels are eligible for this and kind of understanding what the process would look like. But basically, this is an opportunity to get state dollars to develop affordable housing. I feel this way.
August, this seems like something we can bring the planning commission in on, to spend some time looking at on the per parcel map and identify some places we could bring back to the county
Sure.
commission. I'd love to go deeper and understand this a little bit more. I'm not sure we're going to have the full time on this call, but I see that as right in line with the priorities that the planning commission is setting, and the time would be really well spent.
For sure. I just have sent it out to a handful of housing advocates in the community, our planning and zoning office, and the city's planning and zoning office. But maybe I should also, I assume that would get relayed to the planning commission, but maybe I should include both city and county planning commissions so that they have visibility on this as well. And probably developers, honestly. I don't know. I should have the developer listserv at this point, but I do not. So
I think John does from his general
anybody that you want
planning.
to share this with.
I do.
So this is in the agenda. The link is right there, which is in the Google Calendar. But if anybody wants the direct link, I can share it out. I didn't really have any intention behind this besides just raising awareness that this exists. Okay, thank you for that, Emily. Any thoughts on that? Besides, we need to check this out more.
So if I'm reading this correctly, if it would need to be at a minimum of 8 units per acre, we may also need to be looking at our high density housing overlay zones. Because most of these, if we are transferring the underlying zone from highway commercial to residential, our residential zones, not all of them would comply in the county with this. So anyway, that's too tactical for this conversation, but this might be something that needs to be brought before the county commission if that's the case, because we did put a cap on the number of units we can bring in under the HCHO. So that would be need to be a part of this package.
And one other thing that I would just note is, I mean, definitely affordable housing, we need it for sure. We are also, like we talked about, commercial space. So if you're, just keep in mind that commercial space is also dwindling. And
Yeah.
so if the goal, I guess you just have to leave some room for commercial space growth along with affordable
Right.
housing. And, don't get rid of all of it. Just
Well, Well, and I
I
think
don't
that
know.
would have to
We
go.
have a need in both.
Yeah, yeah.
areas.
For sure. I think
Well,
the
and-
idea would, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, August.
No, I was just saying, I think that an inventory process would be like, what parcels qualify regardless of strategy, and then what, what makes sense, what don't make sense, and then honestly, you probably have to bring a development partner on before you can apply for it.
Well, part of the problem we have in the county is when you follow 191 South, both sides of the highway there are highway commercial and they're all split zones. And it's something that I know Mary and the commission have specifically raised as something that we want to look at anyway. And because of the, prior to the overlay for the overnight accommodations overlay, all of those are being turned into overnight housing because that was the highest value of that. Now that that's not viable anymore, people are sitting on these properties. And the problem is what we really lack is general business. Like we have quite a bit of commercial property, but we don't have general business, or our commercial property is just too large of parcels to make it economically viable for individual people to use it, to develop it for smaller manufacturing, for example. What I think could be really interesting as part of this, and this would be, I don't know if John's still in the room, a broader conversation.
Yeah.
But this question of mixed use and node-based development, I know is something we're looking at with regards to the general plan. And I wonder if there's a way for us to think creatively about and I know this is the step 2 of the strategy side, but like, is there some residential zone that could accommodate higher density and mixed use and general business in its allowable zone usages, and specific places in the county where that would be viable, which quite frankly maps pretty much 1-to-1 to where the commercial space is today along 191 with maybe some additional arteries. So
Right.
you'll have to excuse me because I'm very excited about this.
Yeah.
This opens up some big possibilities.
Totally. It's huge. One aside, I mean, maybe I'm just jumping ahead, but the former Red Rock Elementary School site is vacant, undeveloped, and in a prime position to be, relatively dense, affordable housing, aside from trying to address the fact that many people who live there don't want to live there. But, if that's zoned anything but residential or low density, that could be a prime opportunity. And it's a public entity that owns it, with the school district owning it. I don't know. That's just that would have to come out in the wash during the inventory process, but that's kind of the first thought for me. Anyway, I will distribute this, and the proper people who are not me will look into this more detail. So appreciate the interest from everybody here. Any other?
Just as a aside on that, Gabe, this might be worth bringing up with Mary in regards to that split zoning question. And if it's something that the commission wants to move some haste on, the planning commission can take it up as a priority. But I'd love to get some direction from the county commission on where it fits with your priorities before we move too fast forward into some of the steps we might take to even open up this door.
Yeah, I think that I definitely think that there's motivation, and I appreciate the feedback there. I think to a certain degree we're all waiting for the process that is underway with John and the general plan and revisions of the land use code through that process as a way to sort of solve the conundrum with that split zoning. But if I'm not sure if that's incorrect of us to sort of be waiting on that, or I'm not sure.
Cool. Awesome. I'm not sure either.
Great. So I think the next item on the agenda is just consideration of future agenda items. Is there anything else that we need to discuss that we haven't already with regards to further action plans? I think that there's plenty on August and Ben's plate as it is, but if there's anything else at the moment, we can bring that up now, or they can also be emailed here in the near future.
Just a quick question as far as things that were in flight previously, such as that prioritized list of goals and starting to think about like an indicators dashboard. Are those still active? Are we using those, or what's the status there?
So I'm thinking of, there's the first one, which was what was in the diversification strategic action plan. That was like, here are your specific goals from that. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about the outcomes from the exercise we did in September?
No, I'm talking about the Google sheet, not the, yes, the original goals and objectives.
Right. My thinking on that is that there's a lot of really good information in there. But I think that was a starting point, and what seems more to be live is these two items for now, and then the master plan will incorporate probably what was in the diversification strategic action plan, take into account stakeholder input, community feedback, and kind of bear out a bigger picture than just what's in there. I think it's a good starting point, but I don't know if we're using it as our guidepost at this point in time.
And when you say these two things, what are these? two?
Master plan and expansion grants.
Okay.
One thing I want to mention is that I have been thinking some about the fact that we have two economic diversification / development advisory boards / councils.
I was going to ask you about that too. I don't understand the difference.
The very brief history is that this was created second. The first one, the Economic Development Advisory Board, was created in the wake of the state legislature passing the Rural County Grant Program, and that a stipulation of that was that it required a community economic development board to advise on the spending of that money. So that was created while Zachariah was still responsible for economic development. It had a lot of people on it. At the end of that year, Curtis Wells passed the diversification ordinance and action plan and the creation of this body, and had a targeted mission towards diversification, had a planning and zoning element to it, and a smaller size. However, they both strategically kind of work around similar stuff and have some overlap in membership. And for me, it's kind of difficult to catch everybody up on the other meeting when they matter and they're overlap. So to me, I'm thinking I probably would like to collapse them. I don't know exactly what I need to do that, but it'd be easier for me. The problem is I don't think we can keep everybody from both bodies. So there'd have to be some loss of membership, or I don't know how legally or how all that works out, but I'm thinking of trying to put some effort into that and wanted to hear people's thoughts.
So one of my thoughts is, this board is definitely specifically diversification, and I've been on that other board. I'm not currently right now, but we do have another chamber member on that board.
On there now.
And so I guess it depends. I mean, the way I see it, we've got travel council, strictly tourism related.
Yep.
We've got diversification, strictly not tourism related. And then this economic development board is kind of like a merge of the two. And so I definitely think you need to be careful in keeping, there's got to be some merging between our obvious
Yes.
economy and,
Right.
the diversification efforts. And so the way I've seen it is that economic development is just like as a whole. And I can see a lot of good uses for it. Now, whether it's being used that way right now or not, I don't know. And definitely it's a lot more meetings and things for you to manage. But I do think it has a place.
Yeah.
If you're going to keep these other two strictly separate from each other.
Yeah.
That's just my thought.
No, and
But that's easier for me
Yeah.
to say than for you to do. So I get that.
yeah.
But, and also these boards, travel council does have some private representation. This board, not as, I can represent private, but I'm not,
Well, Brandon
the
is part of it.
businesses.
He's kind of supposed to represent that
Who?
from Intrepid Potash.
Oh, right,
Brandon
Right.
Farquhar.
right. But yeah, those are my thoughts. I don't know what everybody else thinks, but.
Yeah. Appreciate that. Any other kind of considerations there?
One thing that comes to mind actually, just on a basic level is thinking about the meetings being potentially a little bit unwieldy in terms of, you know, those rural county grants meetings, you know, those can easily take 2 hours. We're having no problem taking 2 hours. So just on a basic sort of logistical level, is this working in terms of, so we're not trying to, you know, bite off more than we can chew at one time. Overall, I think what this is becoming, you know, I think has a lot of, is having maybe more synergy with that rural county grant program than maybe Kurt Wells had imagined. And that's, you know, I think, you know, he had a vision that was strong, and the vision that this is becoming is strong as well. So it's not my intention to put any, you know, put that initial conception down in any way. But I think that I would agree that there's a lot of carryover, and some of the strategy that happens on this board, it would seem to be, you know, pretty tightly intertwined with the efforts of that board. So yeah, those are some thoughts I have right now. Yeah.
Totally. And yeah, it's interesting because ideally we'd etch a sketch and then create something functional for the needs of the time, but each comes with their historical legacy. You know, the Travel Council Advisory Board being, you know, has a state statute requirement to inform TRT expenditures, but also has, you know, kind of basically been a place for, you know, tourism industry advocates to have a role in advising like the specific department of the Travel Council, and just having that ongoing conversation of what's going on. And it wasn't always county, I'm understanding. It used to be a non-political entity that was just industry at a certain point, and then became county as the TRT thing happened. And you know, I agree. I think there was an overarching economic development board that like focused on the holistic nature of the economy and kind of how to do that strategy. And that to me would lead this master plan. And then you could
Right.
have subcommittees that's like a tourism subcommittee and a diversification subcommittee. But I don't know if, you know, collapsing it in that way, they would all play nice with each other functionally. So, you know, is it worth going through the process of reorganizing stuff? Or
Right.
I think the main thing to me is that there is an alignment clearly for this group and the economic development group, because they're, you know, although this is focused on kind of not like diversification, we're talking a lot about just strategic economy-wide things. The SBDC position is functional for everyone, regardless of kind of industry. And the grants is kind of complementary to diversification funding. And I guess I find it's like we find ourselves on a nice strategic track. We're all on the same page. And then I go to the other group and like, okay, so let's get started. What's the strategy? It's like, oh, we just spent like 4 hours talking about this. Yeah.
August, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, you know, diversification is one arm of a broader economic strategy. And, you know, there are sector-based needs, there are housing-based needs that feed into like a one recommending body that also empowers you and your staff to have the input that you need to be able to drive that strategy forward and your recommendations back to the commission. So I would say consolidation makes a lot of sense as long as it's done intentionally and making sure that we have a plan to capture anything that's left on the table through subcommittees or, you know, however it's organized. But right now it just feels like chaos, and it doesn't serve us. Like, this is stuff that needs to happen fast. We've got balls in the air. We've got our general planning happening. We've got the master planning now, you know, about to get started on the economic side. I think the more consolidation and alignment we can have, the better we're all served in the long run.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Appreciate it, by the way. And
Touche.
So I mean, I think as long as then if you, I mean, I'm just thinking of who's getting cut out of this conversation,
yes,
right?
Yep.
And they are a huge part of economic development.
Yep.
And so from the outside looking in, you have to think about that. And I get that we can't meld this diversification. I mean, this is a very like, you know, appointed by the commission board, and you can't just start inviting people to the conversation. I just think you gotta be really careful about that.
Yeah.
If you're talking about economic development and cutting somebody out of that conversation, that
Right.
is a huge piece of economic development. You just have to be careful of the
Yeah.
ramifications of that.
No, you're totally right. So I mean, my thinking, well, yeah, so there's a bigger picture. Yeah, well, there's many elements of it. I totally hear where you're coming from. And I mean, I'm thinking just between these two boards, if there's an increase in the number of kind of private sector representation kind of in this body, and
Private sector, but not tourism, right?
well, I don't think it was ever discreetly, it's not written in the bylaws or the ordinance that it has to be non-tourism. But I mean, if we etch a sketched it,
Mhm.
trying to make it diverse in that way, well, I don't know. There's
know.
a lot of things to be done.
Yeah.
But I mean, in the way that our department is split in terms of, here's the tourism side and economic development in general, that just happens to have this like diversification bent to it, but it's not necessarily exclusively non-tourism. It's really more local business development,
Mhm.
with a funding with strings attached to a certain line of funding. The Rural County Grant is not strings attached funding. That can be spent on anything. I don't know, you raise a really good, important question, and I would, I still have to give this a lot of thought. So
Right,
this is more input. It is 5 o'clock.
right. I mean, I get the consolidation thing. I don't know. I don't feel super comfortable with just cutting out a pretty huge piece.
with
of that
the
conversation.
implication is that it's not including the tourism industry.
Right,
employees.
right.
Fair enough. So I think there's probably a way to address
Right.
that fairly.
And maybe even if it's that I don't know, but expanding the travel councils. I mean, we've been instructed on travel council, like this is your only job. And
Sure.
all you really get to advise on is this piece. So you're being, they're being constrained there and even in their realm of what they can talk about. And, we're not allowed to talk about it and develop it over here. So where is this piece?
Yeah.
Being fostered?
Fair enough.
On that other board, on the Rural County Grant Board, is that who is a representative on that board that sort of represents either the chamber or a tourism related business? Can you remind me?
Court.
Court,
Right. So
Right.
he works at Western River and
Yeah.
Adventure Center.
Right.
So Lacey, I think very fairly didn't want to be on both of these boards. and so
Right.
brought-
right. So we created an economic development committee within the chamber.
Right.
And Court is the chair of that committee, so it made sense that he would be the representative on that economic development board.
Right. Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Okay.
It seems like it wouldn't be too much of a trick. Obviously, you alluded to the process of appointment through the commission, but including Court on a newly formed consolidated board, I don't necessarily see at the moment that being too.
I mean,
You're kind of zooming out and looking at how the Travel Council Advisory Board is kind of siloed and
Right,
not necessarily explicitly engaging in the larger economic development planning process.
right, because I mean, the commission's direction with the travel council is definitely education and sustainability and all of that. And we've tried to really, on that board, try to narrow down, our ideas and what, our projects and all of that towards this. And if we're, narrowing over here to everything but tourism, it's just kind of like, is there a place that economic development includes a place where tourism gets to foster tourism? And
Yeah. No,
I
hear what you're
mean-
saying. Totally.
gets to really have that voice, if not, this is all we can talk about and this is our goal here.
Yeah. No, I hear you for sure. Anyway, this is who's on that board at the moment, and Court's name isn't on here.
Oh, in place of Lacey is Court.
Is it written somewhere?
Could we
Oh, no,
start
no.
with a roundtable with both bodies? I mean, maybe that's step one, is just have a roundtable with both of those groups and, see how much overlap there is.
Right.
And I mean, quite frankly, if we're talking about economic diversification and we're not talking about tourism, then, we are missing the dominant industry that will drive other industry and other uses. I'm not saying it needs to drive it from the front, but that affects housing, jobs, growth. Local entrepreneurship is largely based in tourism and so on. I think it'd be great to just round table and find time to make that happen either on this schedule or as a separate meeting.
I think to Lacey's point, maybe they're part of that roundtable is not just the two, but the three, right?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah,
I feel like we've got all.
I would
the
agree with
three.
that.
I mean, and
And we have a lot of I'm on all.
Yeah.
You
my
know,
brain's split in like all these pieces where I'm like,
I know.
here's this thing, and then here's this thing.
Well, so just to put a wrap on this from my perspective, August, I think this comes back down to that question of intent. Like, what does your body need to move forward as far as, direction, citizen input, alignment, and so on? And let the organizational structure follow the need and the intent. Otherwise, you're just going to be, juggling multiple balls.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll give it some more thought.
And there can be subcommittees that are, like we're talking about these different focuses, and those could be part of one big group, and you can break off into a subcommittee when you need some task done,
Sure.
particular purpose.
Organizational behavior. It's tough, isn't it?
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I just don't want to get us into it. I mean, I can feel it coming.
Sure. Yeah. So cool. Anyway, this was supposed to be, anyway, just wanted to bring this up. I brought it up with the other group and there was some interest as well. I think they kind of felt, the Economic Development Advisory Board felt like, well, we're kind of just narrow in scope. We only do this rural county grant thing. But the strategy that goes into that application is the same strategy that we're talking about over here. So it all matters. I'll keep thinking about it.
I'll just say one more thing is that, I stepped down from the other group is because if I'm representing the university, I don't think it's the role of the university to make decisions for the community, but to support the decisions that the community makes,
Yeah.
right? So to be on this as an advisory group to share ideas made me more comfortable than to be choosing who gets a grant. I didn't want to be doing that.
Fair enough. Well, yeah, maybe there's a strategy side and then there's a kind of grant and implementation side. I don't know. Anyway, lots of questions. Okay, great. Thank you all. Is there anything left on this kind of subject?
Doesn't look like there's anything left on this agenda. Thank you everyone so much for being here and committing your time and attention to these important endeavors. It's 5:07 and I'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting.
Thanks, Gabe. See ya. See ya,
Yeah.
Lacey. Go home.
Hi.